Alright, so this is a bit of a warm-up for a programming screencast. Never done anything like this before, but I thought I'd give it a shot. Maybe it'll come in handy to some people. I don't really know. This is just a warm-up, so we're going to start with something retardedly simple. FizzBuzz, which everybody claims half the programmers in the world can't actually do. I'm using a language called Rust. You may not be familiar with it, it's a little bit on the new side, but it's basically C++ with safety features added so that you can't actually blow up your computer by accident. Of course, you can still do it on purpose. This is an editor called VI. I'm using it basically because my home machine here is actually a Windows box, and Windows has only moderate support from Rust so far. You can do it, but I have no idea why you would. So what I'm actually doing here is I'm connecting to a VPS, Virtual Private Server, hosted by the very, very nice people at DigitalOcean. This is a remote machine that I'm connecting to via PuTTY and Secure Shell. And it works pretty well. It's not the fastest machine, but it's also not all that expensive either. It goes crazy in orange because I have the visual bell turned on in PuTTY so that it doesn't make noise every time I hit a button. It doesn't do the right thing. Rust has something called an algebraic data type. Of course, it's not called an algebraic data type in Rust. It's called an enum, which makes no sense. In C and other C-like languages, you have enums like this, where actually it's just a list of options. Rust is a little bit more complicated than that because you can do things like this, where the options can carry values. But my evil plan is not to do anything all that complicated at the moment. The fun thing is you can put any kind of value in this enum, which comes in handy when the value that you've put into it is a struct of your own design. For right now, though, all we really want is value, fizz, and buzz. Well, I suppose we also want this. The idea here being that all of the values will have one of these types and only one of these types. We'll say that we're going from 1 to 100. This is not inclusive. There may be a way to make it inclusive, I don't know, but I'm going to pretend that there's not because I don't care that much. And so rather than saying some inclusive range notation, I'm going to just say 1 to 101. In order to map this, I actually have to put it in parentheses. Parentheses are not necessary if you're not going to map the value, but I am going to map the value. So that's the whole program, except for one tiny little detail. We need this function right here that maps everything to a fizzbuzz value. Why didn't you remind me to change the name of that enum from random enum name to fizzbuzz value? Let's see here. U64 is an unsigned 64-bit integer. I'm using an unsigned integer here because I'm not interested in negative values at the moment, so there's no reason to waste time with an integer. I'm using a 64-bit integer because the machine that I'm working on is a 64-bit machine, and actually the 64-bit integer will run faster for most things on this machine. I could go with this instead, a usize. That creates an integer that is pointer sized for the specific machine that you're working on, and it would make a 64-bit integer on this machine, but everybody gets a little bit up in arms when you try that, because what it does is it changes sizes from one machine to another, which means, let's say that we want to do fizzbuzz through 5 billion. On this computer it would work. On a 32-bit computer it would blow up in your face because the integer would wrap before you got done. Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of difference, but well, reality sucks sometimes, you know. I'm not really familiar with how to pause a recording in this, but I wanted to look and see how it was done. Not going to work, clearly. What do you think of my color scheme here? I kind of like this. It took me forever to decide that this is what I wanted to look like, but I'm appreciative of it. The only complaint that I have about this setup is this string literal here is the same color as everything else, which I find silly. But I didn't make the color scheme, so whatever. We're going to take advantage of something called a match statement here, which is probably the single coolest thing in Rust as far as I'm concerned. Match statements usually go based on value or type. In this case, the type is always going to be U64, so that's not going to work for us. So we're going to match on in for all values of in. That's what this first part means. And we're only going to take this branch if in is a multiple of 15. This actually won't work because the enum fizzbuzz value is actually declared right up there. And that means that we have to include the name of it, since we're not actually importing it. I found that a little bit silly too, but nothing I can do about it. Too late. The guys who actually designed Rust are big believers in being explicit whenever it's possible, and that makes sense in a lot of ways. It means that you can look at a piece of code and see what it does without having to know a lot of knowledge about what goes on behind the scenes. You do have to know a lot of behind the scenes knowledge to be able to write Rust, because you don't know what to write otherwise, but you don't have to have it in order to read it, because everything that the program is doing is actually right there on the screen in front of you, which is kind of nice. So here we've covered n for all values of n where n is a multiple of 5, and n for all the values of n where n is a multiple of 3. And lastly, we just spit out n because screw it. And that is actually the entire function, which is a little bit surprising if you have messed around with languages like C or C#. There's no return statement. The value of this function is simply this, the match expression. It's not a statement unless you add that. Semicolon has a very special function in Rust. It doesn't actually delimit the end of a line. It says this is a statement, not an expression. But in this case, we want the value of this expression, so we won't convert it into a statement. This code will kind of work, but not in its current state. What we'll actually need in order to make it really work is that, which is the debug format specifier. We don't have the show format specifier for the enum FZV just yet. So let's see what happens when we try to compile this. I'm going to use just Rust C as the compiler, which I think stands for Rust compiler, which is extremely creative, as you can tell. Normally I would use cargo, but this is not part of a cargo repository, so there's no point in even trying that because it's not going to work. What did I name this? I looked down to the bottom of the Vim window for the name. Very creative, right? Right. Doesn't work. Let me make that a little bit bigger. Mismatched types. Expected U64. I put the wrong type on that function, didn't I? This is supposed to be that. Let's try this again. Let's try this one more time after making the screen a little bit clearer. Format debug is not implemented for the type FZV, so it looks like there's really no point in us actually trying the debug's format specifier because it's not going to work. Let's see here. Vim allows you to skip forward and back by words, which is what I keep trying to do, and it keeps missing this format specifier because nothing in it looks even remotely like a word. It's hard to blame it, but it's also kind of annoying. Let's try deriving the appropriate formatting nonsense. Rust will attempt to write some code for you, just for the hell of it, because it's nice that way. I use clear, which is apparently a command as well as a keyboard shortcut. You type in clear and it clears the screen like that. Actually, it's not cleared, it just scrolls up, which sounds silly, but it's seriously right there. But I use that to give myself more room to read the debug results. I also use Control and L. This is a Windows machine. I don't know what that would be on a Mac or a Linux box. But Control L will do the same thing without you having to type clear. To do that, I used my command key and then the left bracket, and then puts you into copy mode in Tmux, which comes in really handy for scrolling up. To get out of it, you can hit Q or escape. Works fine. So basically it's saying that show is not what we're supposed to use here anymore, which, okay, great, sounds wonderful. I'm going to type CW to change the word there, and I'm going to put in display, which I think is the thing that replaced show. Rust is still under development, very slightly. You can't just assume that everything works the same way it did last time. It's a little bit annoying now and then. Display does not even exist. Let's see here. Custom traits. Apparently, display is not a thing because it's never even heard of it. We're going to try debug. which works. Display is totally a thing. Why'd you lie to me about that? Trait, core format display is not implemented for type SCV. Well, we're just going to have to do it the hard way. Here we go. We'll start with IMPL, which is the keyword for this, impl. I don't know why they cut it off there, because that's less humorous than imp, basically. They're not into fun as a thing when it comes to programming. I mean, it's fun to be finished. It's not necessarily fun to write Rust. It's fun to write Ruby. For me, it's fun to write C#. Rust is very businesslike. It's no bull crap with this language. Display. I forget what the display trait actually requires. We'll find out. It'll probably tell us whenever we try to do this and we fail totally. I'm leaving the code on the tiny side of the screen right now because it's just kind of tiny and cute, and these error messengers are massive. Undeclared trait name display. Nonsense. Okay, I didn't declare it, but it does exist. Standard format display. I know over here on the right hand side, if you look, it says core format display, which is really kind of dumb. Apparently, at some previous point in Rust's history, standard was called core, and standard back then stood for something entirely unrelated. I don't really know. I don't think that the old standard libraries still exist as a part of the Rust standard library. But if you see core, you can just kind of replace that mentally with standard, and you'll usually be right. Sounds a little silly, but like I said, it's still under work. Not all trait items implemented, missing format. So the name for that function is actually format. Don't know what the hell it returns. This is the kind of thing that you really should just try to look up, I imagine. But I don't do that. At least not if I don't have to. Format has a self-declaration in the trait, but not in the implementation. What that means is that it's actually a method rather than a function, or at least it's called with method syntax. And self is the item that you are calling the function on. You'll see what that looks like eventually. I'll show you because I'm just nice like that. Say you have, well, here's an example. This thing right here. This is what we call an iterator. It iterates over a range from 1 to 100. Map is actually it's an extension on an iterator, but it is actually method syntax. That's why there's a dot connecting it to the iterator. What map does is it takes self, in this case the iterator, and a function to create an iterator of a type of new items. Now I can't get out of visual mode for no apparent reason. Whatever. We're not actually going to use the format function, but format is used by println to invoke whatever it needs the display trait for. Don't really know what it needs the display trait for. It needs it to write the value to the console, basically. Format has one parameter, but the declaration in format display format has two. It'd be nice if they would actually show me the declaration, but they haven't yet, which is, you know, just downright not nice, right? I just noticed that there's another error being printed at the very end that I wasn't looking at that refers to this line right here. Basically, we were passing back a bare value for the final branch of the match expression, and that's not correct. We need a value wrapped in this value struct thing here. So now that error should go away. Oh, unresolved name, because we forgot to lead that value there with the proper stuff. In this case, FCV value. All right, now we're back to format has one parameter, blah, 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 blah. Don't care. All right, so what we're going to do is give up trying to guess, that is, what's going on here, and just look up the display trait on doc.rustlang.org, which comes in really handy. Hopefully you can see this when I drag it over onto the screen. I don't really know how that's going to work. This is a stable trait, which means we should be able to use it whenever we want to, which comes in handy. Display has a single function, format, FMT, which takes and self and immutable formatter and returns a result of type unit and error. I'm not going to get into what exactly that means, but basically it means that this is a void function, but it returns a result. So it's going to do its work without returning you the actual work, but it's going to return a thing that says what it accomplished when you did the work. No, what did I break? Responder. Huh. Vim has a very long memory. I was working on something that had a responder in it a while ago, and apparently it hasn't forgotten that yet. Now the fun thing is that formatter is probably going to throw an error because I think it's actually standard formatter, but I don't know that. See this right here? These two parentheses? That is a type. It is a special type in Rust. It's the closest thing Rust has to null. If you're familiar with other languages like C and C#, null means nothing. There's nothing of value here. Unit actually means there's something here, but it hasn't got a value. Let's say this match expression currently has a value of FCV, some variant of FCV. Now that I've added the semicolon to the end of it, it has a value of unit, which is the type of all statements. That's why I said that this doesn't really have a return value. If it's successful, all you're going to get back is unit. If it's unsuccessful, you'll get back that, which is a lot less fun to get back, so you don't want to hand that back too often. This formatter actually needs a name. I'm usually going to go with F. Ah, we're out of space. One thing we can do with tmux here is we can actually just change the size of the pane. Comes in really handy. I don't think that tmux by default has settings for that, but I'll show you mine real quick if you want to see them. Don't even ask how I keep doing that wrong. This takes us to the tmux configuration file in my home directory. That's what the tilde at the front of the line there means. So the resize buttons I have set up are actually the up, down, left, right buttons from Vim, because I use those all the time anyway, and it came in handy. I'd have the prefix modified to J because that's an easy button to get to versus B, which is not. And I have well, a bunch of other crap that doesn't matter. It's fun. Clock mode color green? It's really not green, is it? It's very much orange down there at the bottom right. Yeah, totally is. But I've bound Control K to resize up, Control J to resize down. This C here, that's what that actually stands for, is control. I think it would be C, except that there's a dash behind it. Don't even ask. Whatever. I'm going to use the Q command to quit, so that if I actually did make any changes, it'll gripe and tell me. Actually, I can just do this. This means quit no matter what, and it'll discard any changes I accidentally made, which is good because I didn't really mean to make any changes. So here's the format function. I believe what we have to do is call a function on the formatter itself. Although I don't actually remember how to do that either. So we're going to go to the documentation again and find out. All right, perfect. So this is what this says. We're actually going to call a macro, that's what the exclamation point here means, called write. We're going to pass to that the formatter and a format string and any of the values that are required by the format string. Now here's where it gets complicated though. Anything you do with FizzBuzz is based on what the actual FizzBuzz value is, because you can't print 5 for 5, you have to print buzz for no apparent reason. So, hey, you forgot to tell me that I had screwed that up. FizzBuzz is right only for the first one. This is supposed to be buzz, and this is supposed to be fizz. Perfect. All right then. So we're going to match self. You almost let me forget again. Oh, fun fact. Rust will actually complain at us for doing this. Because you're not making use of the value in, it's going to tell you you've created a variable and then ignored it, which is a dangerous thing to do in code, because what will eventually happen is somebody's going to come along and edit your code and use that variable, and it's going to be stale. Because you're not making use of it, you're not going to maintain it, and basically by the time they get around to using it, the behavior of that variable will be, for all practical intents and purposes, unspecified. It's going to blow up in their face, and they're never going to find out why, because they're going to get fired before they get the chance. We're not passing these values because we're not using them at all. The reason that I stored the values, on the other hand, is basically that at some later point you may want to get the sum of all of the multiples of 3 or 5 or both, and not having those values stored with their variant types would be really annoying in that case. This time we are passing in, because that's the only thing we actually require. Luckily, in is a U64, which already has display defined for it. We're not supposed to return a value here, but each of these write calls actually returns this. So we're still going to make match an expression, not a statement. Let's see if this works. Uh-oh. Undeclared type formatter. What a surprise. Told you that was going to happen, didn't I? We can actually do this the easy way. Undeclared type error. I don't actually know what type the error is supposed to be. Let me look real quick. What you can do, believe it or not, you can click on that and it'll take you there. Standard format error. So, it's in the same namespace. We'll just grab it. I like to do these things in alphabetical order because apparently I am incredibly insane. It doesn't make any difference at all, but what else? What other order are you going to put them in? Precedence? I sometimes try to put them in order of precedence, like which one is the most important, that one goes to the front. But then you're stuck trying to decide which one's the most important, and it's just a huge waste of time, really. Now I can't find FZV. Undeclared type or module. Oh, why did you do that? Now I get to show you a neat trick. That's good, right? We're going to watch the bottom of the screen. %s f z b f z v global. Replace the thing on the left with the thing on the right everywhere. I can't believe that worked on the first try. All right. Mismatched types. Expected a reference, but encountered the actual thing. So, the reason for that is that self is passed by reference here. So we actually have to add and in front of all of these. I could probably do this a lot more quickly if I knew more about Vim, but still learning. What do you know, it worked. Alright, so to run the program, we preface it with period / u thingy, and then we type in the name. There are only two things in here named with an F, so, oh wait, you gotta see this. Two things. You hit tab again and Z shell will give you that little option bar. I'll show you one more time. Using the arrow keys to select the one I want, hit enter. What do you know, it worked on the first try. I'm used to seeing things work on the first try in C#. I never see things work on the first try in C or C++. But basically the cool thing about a language like this is if it compiles, it will probably run, which is kind of awesome. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something. And maybe I'll do some more of these if I don't decide that I sounded like too much of an idiot.